We're really lucky today to have a panel of members who are experienced in operating geothermal energy in Hawaii and who can share about the many lessons learned in the process. And also Nicole, who knows a lot about the technology and how to explore. And then of course, Colton, who can share how this fits in with the utility's vision for Hawaii. Setting intention is always an important practice in Hawaii, so as part of our introductions, I'd like to ask us to share our name, where we're from or what aina we connect to, and what it is we want you all to walk away with after this panel. So like every other facilitation, I'll start. I'm Noelani Kalipi from Hilo, and I'd like everybody to walk away with wanting to discuss more. Thank you. Colton?
Good afternoon. I'm Colton Ching. My aina is a mix of Kaneohe on Oahu as well as Wailuku, Happy Valley in Maui. And I think the outcome, the takeaway that I want all of us to have today is to really think about what are the different ways in which geothermal as a resource can be part of our state's portfolio of renewable resources.
Hi, I'm Nicole Lautze. My aina is a combination of Honolulu, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Italy, because I'm a first-generation American. My mom was born in Italy. My takeaways for today would be, as part of the national geothermal community at this point, I sit on the board of a national organization, maybe just an understanding that the geothermal community is a very well-intentioned, kind group that cares about the planet, most of all, and that there's a lot to be learned about the potential resource across the entire state of Hawaii.
Aloha, my name is Mike Kaleikini. I grew up in Hau'ula, Oahu, but I live in Hilo because my wife is from Honolulu. Guess who's the boss?
Us Hilo girls, yeah. Okay. Before we dive into operations and technology, we wanted to start out with having, and this is going to be a talk story with us more than a class, wanted to talk about why are we even talking about geothermal in Hawaii? You know, what is it that we know? Why is it worth even having a discussion about? Anybody?
Yeah, I'd like to start off by saying that, you know, we've had geothermal for several decades. About close to 40 decades, and there's very much more information that we want to find out about geothermal. And for the past several decades, we've confirmed that it can be a contributor to, you know, our goals for decarbonization and moving away from fossil fuels.
If I can build upon what Mike said, because he said an important word, he said decarbonization. I think an important thing for all of us to remember is that we have a state policy to be net zero in carbon emissions or less by 2045. And in order to do that, a lot of parts of our state's economy is going to turn to electrification to reduce their emissions. And the state of Hawaii State Energy Office and we have done complementary studies that have basically said that the use of electricity in this state will have to double in order to achieve that policy. You know, and you have to think about a doubling in the use of electricity, even with high efforts on energy efficiency to attain that goal. And so you have to think about how important a resource like geothermal can be to achieve that doubling of electricity demand.
And we know it's firm for renewable, right? Probably the firmest renewable, given what you guys say about wind. Anyway, Mike, let's start with you. As the only, you know, as the operator, the only geothermal energy operator in Hawaii, what would, you know, what if anything would you like to share about Puna Geothermal Venture?
Thank you, Noe. So there's a whole lot of sharing I'd like to do, but I want to condense it down and actually start off by just providing a couple slides just to give everyone, for those of you that aren't familiar, The geothermal facility is located on Hawaii Island in the district of Puna and Pahoa. And it's been we call ourselves Puna Geothermal Venture, but it's been an adventure. All projects go through some sort of growing pains. We are one of them. I'm trying to change the page here. There we go. So for those of you that may be aware, in 2018, there was an eruption on the Kilauea East Rift zone, which we as a geothermal developer was well aware of could happen and expected it to happen. But we were fortunate on the layout, and as you can see by some of these photos, the lava went around us. We did lose some equipment. This was in 2018. In 2019, we were able to go back on location and make preps to restore the facility. We had to do a rebuild of the transmission lines, and then we had to refurbish equipment. But in November of 2020, we came back online. So before that, in 1993, PGV started commercial operations at 25 megawatts. We increased to 30 in 96, and in 2012 to 38 megawatts. That's our current contract today. And then I just mentioned the eruption in 2018, and 2020 we came back online. Prior to the eruption, though, we were negotiating for an amended and restated power purchase agreement. So we did get that. Hawaiian Electric finally got that to the Public Utilities Commission, and that was approved ending of 2023. And so we're working on that right now. That's what's happening today. Brief overview summary. Our control room. And this is the other information I did want to share. I touched on it. We got the new project approved, the Repower project. What that consists of is the installation of 3 newer, more efficient generating units that'll replace the 12 units that you see here with the condenser fans. Just by the fact that it's more modern and more efficient, we will gain about 20% in generation. So the resource that can provide for 38 megawatts today would enable us to generate 46 megawatts. Smaller footprint, less piping, so less noise, less potential for piping emissions, that sort of thing. So really an improvement to what we've been operating over the last 30 years. So last year was our 38th year anniversary. Today is our 31st year. So that's what's going on at PGV, and we look forward working with Hawaiian Electric, our community. You know, that's the key stakeholders that we continue to work with.
Thank you. I have a question. You know, when people think about geothermal, the general public, and those of us old enough to have lived through the 70s and 80s, you know, it was controversial. Many times when we raise geothermal energy as a topic, people go, ooh, that's controversial. We can talk about something else. Yeah, we can see the merit, but ooh. Is that still the experience that you're having?
Yes, not as controversial like we've experienced, 30 years ago, but it's not any more controversial than you hear about other projects. You know, you hear about a telescope, you hear about other technologies like wind and solar for different various reasons. So this is perfect for us. I mean, looking at solutions for our path going forward, just for us to be able to collect information and be informed so we can make informed decisions on what we would like to see for renewable energy.
Do you think the community after 31 years of the project has learned much about having it there?
I'm like the governor. Everybody has my cell number. I saw you. Anyway, but the community has learned a lot, and they call us, and they're we're very transparent and open. There are folks that don't like us, so we know them well, and there are folks that do support geothermal. And there's an upswell statewide. I think the National Renewable Energy Lab has been conducting listening sessions on geothermal. There's going to be the premier geothermal conference being held on Hawaii Island in October. It's called Geothermal Rising. If anyone's interested, it's the geothermal conference, an annual conference. And then ahead of that, there will be a symposium on indigenous, symposium on geothermal. So the Geothermal Rising folks, of which Nicole is a board member, are inviting indigenous members from New Zealand, from Aotearoa, from Native American Indians from the continent, and we also have some folks helping us with indigenous Hawaiians to represent.
Oh, that's great. And I would say that, see how the panel reacts in that, I think we were all talking for many years about at some point when we run out of being able to build projects that people cannot see or that don't impact their daily lives as much, we'd have to get into the hard discussions, and there'd have to be much deeper efforts for community participation on where the next few projects will go, and I think we're there.
Yeah, definitely community involvement, community education. I mean, there's interest even with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands potentially trying to locate a geothermal resource. And with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, one of the key elements is to have beneficiary consultation. So it is outreach, it is educational, and that's going to be the key. It will never end. It's a continuous, ongoing commitment.
I think in the Ulupono Initiative survey, we saw cost savings and environmental impacts as the key drivers, right? Colton, you have anything about cost savings?
Yeah, those were very interesting survey results because they parallel a bit with what we heard in our surveys in our integrated grid planning. Clearly, costs is going to be an important metric and measure that defines the success of any plan. And if you look at geothermal as an example of a resource to consider, I think the real benefit of geothermal being done at scale is the ability to tap into a resource where, once you identify it and you develop projects around it, you know what you're going to get. The upfront investment may be quite high, but that resource is going to be there for many, many years. And as you said in the very beginning, it's going to be a resource that's dispatchable and firm. And so when you think about the near zero incremental costs of a resource like geothermal and the fact that it's firm, it can help to make costs of running the grid lower as well as its inherently low cost when it's dispatched a lot. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if you have the right mix of resources on your grid for geothermals to help not just be one of the factors that helps to reduce our use of fossil fuels and the cost impact of fossil fuels, but when we are majority renewables or all on renewables, it can help the cost of that renewable portfolio be lower as well.
Thank you. So Nicole, we know Hawaii Island has had geothermal capacity, and you've been advocating pretty strongly for exploring the state's geothermal capacity. So could you kind of walk us through, why and what that can lead us to?
Yeah, sure. So Don Thomas, who's one of my mentors, finished a statewide geothermal resource assessment that he published in 1985, which discussed the possibility that a geothermal resource exists on all islands in the state. There was a dearth of research for decades, except for a little bit of research, due to the low cost of oil, until 2014, when I was funded by Department of Energy to lead another statewide assessment, which I'll talk about a little bit, but we'll go ahead and go into my slides, I guess. And this first one I put up because Richard Haw likes to talk about the hot spot and how we'll be over the hot spot. So, and I'm a geologist, so my first two slides are geology. So I think most of us in the room know this, but I like this picture that shows the hot spot currently resides below the big island of Hawaii, and our two active volcanoes are Kilauea and Mauna Loa. But the other islands in this, volcanoes on this island, as well as Maui, Haleakala, or East Maui volcano, have a chance of erupting too. The hotspot we consider relatively stable. The Pacific plate moves to the northwest, so the age of the volcanoes gets older towards Kauai with one wild card. How do we, or as scientists, how do we want to find our heat or our potential geothermal resource? Well, we want to understand the geology. The only source of heat in these islands is going to come from magma that's intruded into the subsurface. And these volcanoes are fairly well behaved, so we kind of know which pathways the magma takes for the most part, which is that comes up from depth below a caldera. So you can see Kilauea caldera, and then can shoot out along rift zones fairly shallowly, so within the upper 2 to 4 kilometers. And eruptions occur on those rift zones, as Mike discussed, occurred at Kilauea in 2018. So when we're going to prospect for heat in the subsurface, the most logical place to go first is where we have volcanic activity, which is Kilauea's East Rift Zone, and that's where most of the geothermal exploration was localized in the 1970s. So what you see bottom right is that extension of Kilauea's East Rift Zone into Puna. The red dots are volcanic vents, so places where eruptions occurred, and the yellow dots are geothermal exploration wells that were drilled. So there was an abundance of investment in the Puna region in the 1970s. So Caldera's rift zones and vents, this wild card I mentioned is the rejuvenation stage, which you see there. So that is most prominent on Oahu, like the Diamond Head, the Punch Bowls. Those eruptions happen up to millions of years after the shield stage of activity, and whether there's enough heat in the subsurface to constitute a geothermal resource, we don't really know. Interestingly, Kauai has the most volume of rejuvenation stage magma erupted on the surface, and Kauai has some warm water wells. So chance of a resource there, but we don't have these answers yet. Onto the project that I led between 2014 and 2021, what I'm basically showing here is a map that shows the probability of subsurface heat. I'll talk about how we got to this map, but back to the geology. If you know where the caldera and the rift zones of our volcanoes are in the state, those are basically the reds and oranges, which is where we have the highest probability of heat in the subsurface. So, and those reds go to oranges as we get volcanically older along the islands. I don't think I have anything else to say here. I'll show this again, because this can guide our geothermal prospecting moving forward. Was funded over 3 phases. In phases 1 and 2, we didn't only look at the geology, but we integrated geophysical and groundwater data. That's what I'm showing on the left. Won't get into that. We had to come up with a mathematical probability model, which we did. That's the equation. And then in phase 2, we were allowed to go out and get new data, and we did so where I have those red boxes in the picture on the right. So we collected more groundwater and geophysical data. And in phase 3, they wanted us to drill. And the team did really well because we got to phase 3. There was a down select per phase. So only 4 teams nationally made it to phase 3. We needed to deepen a water well. We did so on Lanai. Complicated reasons we chose Lanai. We didn't get enough money to really drill a new well, and Lanai had an existing water well that had some elevated temperatures that could get us to 1,500 feet, and we could start drilling from there. Left, I'm showing a temperature gradient plot. So on the left slide, as you go down, you're going down into the earth depth, and on the right, you're going up in temperature. All those oranges are wells that were drilled into Kilauea's East Rift Zone, where we expect to have heat. The blues are 3 other deep wells that were drilled in the state. I'll show where they are coming. And the green is the results of Lanai. So unfortunately, we ran out of money before we could get to exciting depths on Lanai, but we're right in that horizon with Kilauea's East Rift Zone. And we didn't go where we wanted to go, where the geophysics guided us, because we didn't have enough money. We took advantage of that one existing well. But these results are somewhat exciting and have relevance to the older islands, volcanically older islands in the state, right? Because this Lanai last erupted 1 million years ago, and this is the first kind of evidence that we have reasonably exciting temperatures to a depth of 1 kilometer. I like to use this to demonstrate that we can't drill half a well and get the answers we need. We really need the money to get down to 2 kilometers, because What we've seen in Hawaii is that we don't always see the exciting temperatures until we get below 1 kilometer. And that's due to an abundance of cold rainfall and permeable rock. On the right is the drilling setup on Lanai, which I use to demonstrate fairly low footprint. When I talk about drilling, I think people imagine this huge production, and it's really not. I'll have another picture of the drill rig, which in this case is hidden behind some shipping containers. It's a crew of about 12 people that work on shifts, 12-hour shifts of 6 people and 6 people. Happy to answer questions about that. So I guess what I've outlined up till now is how do we do geothermal prospecting? It's these 3 steps. I think I showed this slide last year. We can look at groundwater data, we can conduct a geophysical survey, and we really need to drill before we can talk about what temperatures we measure. I also want to point out, my little note on the right, is that every time University of Hawaii has drilled one of these wells, we've learned something out of this world about our groundwater. So we can talk about that too. So these are not geothermal wells. We're not going to produce geothermal fluids from them. They're really subsurface characterization wells to figure out where is the water, what is the quality of the water, and what is the temperature of the water. Hydrogen is talked about. There's native hydrogen in the ground places. That could happen here, not where we're making hydrogen, but there might just be hydrogen in the ground, which we can also look for when we drill. And a new research arena of mine is carbon storage, where we can contemplate taking carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into rock underground. We can't even really get started here because we don't have many deep wells in the state to understand what the fluid movement and conditions are, temperature. And we need those data to even model what CO2 that may 20 years from now be injected will do. And then kind of associated costs. So where are we? We've done pretty much all the groundwater work we can do with a few exceptions statewide. We've done fairly extensive geophysics on Lanai, and where those dots are on the Big Island map is where we've collected geophysical survey points on the Big Island. So we're doing pretty good on Big Island, but for example, Kohala volcano would be another, and Hualalai, places where we could do more geophysics. I forgot where I'm stopping. Okay, so what I feel like we really need to do and find funding to do is to do more deep drilling. So these are basically, I've mentioned that slide or cartoon on the bottom is in Puna, where we have a lot of exploration wells. The 3 stars on the Big Island show where deep wells were drilled on the Big Island. These weren't looking for temperature. The 2 in the near Mauna Kea were looking for groundwater. The one near Hilo was trying to understand growth and evolution of the Hawaiian volcanoes, shield volcanoes. And then my well on Lanai, which only got to 1 kilometer, so arguably a deep well or not. More deep wells would help us understand the characteristics of the subsurface as related to those 3 research arenas as mentioned. So I would propose we need more deep subsurface characterization wells through drilling. Each one costs $3 to $5 million, so that's significant capital. In my head, I've been thinking, can we convince the state or the federal government to give us $15 million a year for 10 years? That would allow 3 to 4 deep wells per year. Each well will provide us immense new information because we have such a dearth of data. We're starting from such little information, and we would think, in my mind, that would most likely be public funds, so state or federal, although there is some private equity interest. And then the information we gain from that would entice private developers to come in. Although folks have been telling me we should get those private developers as part of the conversation now. But if we can generate the public funds for this, I try to argue it would be a win-win because we know so little about the deep subsurface within the state that even if we don't find temperature as related to geothermal, we're going to learn information that we lack right now. For example, at where we drilled at Pohakaloa training area, when we were trying to help the Army find a source of groundwater, we found groundwater 4,500 feet above sea level, something like that. Don Thomas would know the exact number. And basically, if our geophysics supports the volume of groundwater there, we basically doubled the volume of groundwater that was known to the Big Island. So, big win. I forget what else I have here. Oh, stop. Okay, well, I'll just round this out. And I'd like to point out that this work is not scary. The geophysics, for example, we've involved junior high and high school students on Lanai and gave them a stipend for their participation. And I'd also like to point out that UH owns the equipment to get the work I've outlined done. So on the right is the drill rig. It's got the University of Hawaii stamp on it. We have the shipping container stocked full of equipment to support the drilling. One of those guys in the picture is a driller identified to come out with our next project, and he was like, wow, I'm so impressed you guys could run a drilling company at the university. It's stored right now on PTA because it's arid, and so our equipment isn't rusting, so it's in good condition. And my final slide for now is that we also, community education and outreach and support has been a big theme, and we consider this, and I'm by no means an expert at it, so open to any input anyone wants to give, but this will clearly be a need as we move forward. So when we drilled on Lanai, we had an open house. The community could come watch what we were doing from a safe distance. The person who writes Lanai today took an interest in what we were doing, and HGGRC, my little group at UH, has continued to make a dedicated effort to engage with the HHL, with HHA beneficiaries, with Sustainable Energy Hawaii, et cetera.
Thank you. So as someone who doesn't know anything about your drilling equipment, right? And as someone who always gets asked these questions, how much damage is being done when you're drilling? Like, can you go into how big is the hole and how do you make it go down that far?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder to mention that the hole is very small. So this is called slim hole drilling, where maximum diameter is 5 inches, and then we telescope to 3 inches. Next year, if I'm invited, I'll bring a piece of drill core. And we collect the core, too, the rock, which tells us information about where there's a perch zone and things related to the hydrology, which is important to know for the geothermal resource and managing that, too, should we find temperature. The hole's really small. The acreage that we need on the surface is 1 to 2, so it's not a major operation. The fluids are mostly water, so we do need a water resource, which in the center of the Big Island is an issue because there's no water production well nearby, so that increases the cost. We have to bring water in. On Lanai, we could use the brackish water that they have at high level, so that was not an issue there. So cost depends on exactly where we are.
No, I just wanted to point out Richard Ha is with us on that photo on the bottom.
Oh, thank you. Good segue. One of the things I did promise Richard when he called me to say, should I still get on the flight, was that he's long been an advocate of geothermal energy for the state, largely because of the items that have been highlighted. We're over the hotspot. The more we do, the more economical it can become. It's a resource that's here, and I think that he would want me to share that he has put all of these endeavors into a new organization called kiokiandmalia.com, where he has the cutest animation of Hawaii's future children, but reminding us of the importance of taking action for sustainability, for resiliency, being courageous, doing the exploration to be able to provide options and opportunities for our future generations as they grapple with the impacts facing Hawaii through global climate change, through rising energy costs, et cetera. And it's a combination of education, health, and aina. So that's what Richard would have been discussing, and thanks for sharing and pointing out that he's in that picture. Going back to some of the challenges, right, as we look at moving forward, we've been talking about this for a long time, right? Do you think it's beginning to resonate that inaction is actually a form of action?
Yeah, I definitely agree. If we don't do nothing, we're at a point here that we need to take action, and we've been doing it for some time. You know, there's been challenges, some of the concerns that we as a geothermal facility have heard over time is, well, why do you build a geothermal facility on the world's most active volcano, right? And so our parent company, which is Ormat, with our corporate offices in Nevada, Reno, Nevada, we have facilities worldwide. We have geothermal facilities in Nevada, in California, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, Iceland, in South America, in Africa. We build geothermal facilities where the geothermal resource is, and it's typically on a rift zone, like places in the Philippines, similar to Hawaii and Indonesia. Now, in Nevada and California, the resource there, the heat, is actually generated by the tectonic plates pushing against each other. So that resource is a little bit different than our volcanic heat that's produced here. So, when folks say, well, Mike, why do you guys, it's crazy, you build a geothermal facility on the world's most active volcano. So that's where the resource is at, And then we tell them, well, why do you build your home on the world's most active volcano? So similar, we have plans. We have plans to address, we implement our plans during the eruption and they work fine. So, and if anybody's interested, you can talk with our plant manager. We have a booth, and he was there during the eruption and leading the charge. So, those are the types of comments. We need to take action. Inaction is not acceptable.
Well, yeah, and I think actually when we had our first brainstorming about this panel, the first thing that came to me, which didn't today, but was that, this exploration can get going now, and it's not, the development conversation can even follow on later because, and it related to the carbon storage work I do too, we're not going to get to development quickly, and we're not going to be able to inject CO2 quickly. So even if we don't want a geothermal power plant tomorrow, we need this information for the next decade and decisions that might be made a decade from now. So it might not be us, it might be our keiki making these decisions, but the information is valuable, right? No matter what. Climate conditions might get worse, climate conditions might dictate that this becomes essential to us. And I think the inaction is really counterproductive for Homo sapiens globally.
Maybe just to add to that, so when Nicole ran through the history, well, actually both of you, Michael and Nicole, there's a lot of activity in exploring and understanding the geothermal resource potential in Hawaii. And it started off in the most obvious location. But that research, that drilling that was done when even I was young, were all necessary to have PGV that we have today. And I think one of the reasons why we only have one geothermal resource, or at least geothermal in one location, is because that research that led to that first project didn't continue at the pace and scale that it was going through in the 70s and early 80s. So to your question, Noe, about does inaction lead to a decision? It does, right? Discontinuing or at least slowing down our work in this space has resulted, not intentionally, but has resulted in geothermal playing a somewhat limited role when you look at the entire state's energy needs. To Nicole's point, going through the efforts and her desire to continue and restart that exploration will help us, or help our children, have the option to figure out what is the right, what's the right component of geothermal that should be and part of a system. Because without that upfront research, it's going to be very difficult, and if possible, very expensive for individual project developers to build new geothermal plants anywhere in this state. And that's why I think the work that Nicole and the university is doing is so important to enable us to even have the idea and the option of doing more geothermal in Hawaii.
And along these lines, I'm really happy to hear about the Indigenous summit that's going to be held later, because even with respect to testing, right, any action that involves an area, most often it helps to talk to the people who know the ancestral knowledge of that area, right, and who have the mo'olelo and the mo'okuaha of it. Is any of that a part of the testing when you're looking at wells and talking to people?
That's
Yeah.
to me. Yes. So I think, I guess a couple ways to answer that. There's, I guess, two ways to go about it, which is just to take on like a community, indigenous outreach, engagement effort, which is happening. I'm not the leader of that, but it is happening. I think HSEO is working on that. And then Geothermal Rising is working on that in the context of the conference that's going to be in Waikoloa next year. Mm-hmm. And I'm contributing my knowledge, which is mostly science. My experience going into Lanai and wanting to be respectful of the community with funding I needed to spend within 12 months was, to engage with Pulam Lanai, who has cultural experts on their team, and to say, how do we come into this respectfully? So Kepa Mali was on their staff and, advised me and my team, and we held, Pulam Lanai hosted community meetings that Don Thomas and I went to and talked about what we were going to be doing and answered questions. And we, did an environmental assessment, got asked a lot of questions about what the process was going to be, answered the questions. So it was transparent, I would say, and it went well. So that was a positive experience. And so my philosophy will be moving forward too, once I identify where I want to go work, to go in respectfully and asking for feedback and transparently saying that this is what we plan to do, what questions can I answer. And now it's good that more people are wanting to talk about this because I don't have to do it all by myself, and I can work with HSEO and other groups that also want to participate in this effort.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone who is sending us questions on the panel. So I'm going to move to some of the questions. One is, what do naysayers on geothermal production facilities most often take issue with? Is it not very ecologically low impact and relatively less intrusive? Mike, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can share what we as the facility in Pahoa experiences. It's noise is a concern, lighting is a concern, and there's natural gases in the geothermal resource. If there's an eruption, for example, the gases that we deal with is sulfur dioxide. You see it in the volcanic plume. But with geothermal, the resource that comes up in the form of hot water and steam, there is hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is the rotten egg smell. Now, you don't normally smell that because the piping and the facility is all closed loop with respect to the earth. But if there is an upset, a failure, a seal, or a gasket, then there's potential for folks to smell it. So those are the primary concerns that we have dealt with. In other facilities worldwide, noise and lighting has been a typical concern. Environmental impact. So there's also don't let me forget the cultural aspect. Yeah, there's folks that their beliefs are that it's not proper to be utilizing the resource from Pele, and some folks even have mentioned it's sacrilegious. And then of course there's other Native Hawaiians who have shared and said that it's a gift, right? We use it wisely. If our children or our grandchildren could be helped by Pele in some form, then consider it and do it wisely and with respect. So those are, and then what's interesting is not only in Hawaii, there is the cultural concerns. For example, in New Zealand, in Iceland, right, the Philippines. We're not the only culture that we're very similar worldwide. And that's something we have to be very aware of. For example, even if a development is going to be considered on Department of Hawaiian Homelands, you saw the map where the hot red graphs on your pictures are, and you need to hold beneficiary consultation. You need to talk to folks that live in the area. And again, it's not just for geothermal, it's all developments, but we're focused today on our path going forward with geothermal.
Thank you. Nicole, I think this is for you. Can you give a quick summary of the cost to drill test sites? If you own the equipment, what makes it so expensive?
The biggest cost is the equipment. Well, so we own the equipment, but you need ancillary equipment and the crew. So the crew cost that we're budgeting currently is $12,000 a day. You need skilled crew members. So that's the highest cost. We need to buy drill bits. We need to, having a consistent drilling campaign where the drill rig doesn't sit 5 years between projects would be great. So we need to buy a new engine for the drill rig. It's going to cost $50,000 or $60,000. What's called the drill string, which goes down the hole. We budgeted $200,000 for that. We'd like to have new things in place, because if you've got a drill crew costing $12,000 a day and you need to get a new part to the drill site from the mainland or international, you don't want your crew sitting for 2 weeks while you're waiting for that part to arrive. So we bring everything that we could conceivably need to execute the project smoothly in. I think that's the main cost. You know, we do all the permitting process, which is time consuming. So like I would hire a new staff member at the university to assist with procurement and permitting kind of thing. So the costs build up fast. I will say, with current funding seeming on the table, I was concerned that the university was going to take large overhead, but if it's state-to-state funding, I've convinced the administration to only take 10% overhead. So I am liking the university right now for project execution. And you know, from that, I get fiscal support, and there's Office of General Counsel at the university that will help if we encounter legal challenges and that kind of thing. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Let me add a little bit from our perspective. When we're drilling geothermal wells, so this is an activity that doesn't occur in a lot of places. I mean, it's just isolated in Pahoa. It's not like in the oil and gas industry in California or Texas. You have hundreds and hundreds of rigs. So you have to bring in this specialized equipment, very costly, like Nicole explained. And, you know, the rig that the university uses is smaller scale than the ones that would be needed for a full-size geothermal well, which could be costing, you know, in the order of $100,000 to $200,000 per day, right? But if you compare it to like the offshore oil rigs, they're like $1 million a day. So geothermal is a bargain.
And what's the cost of a geothermal well for comparison? Because these we don't call geothermal wells. These are slim holes / subsurface characterization wells.
So geothermal wells can cost anywhere from $5 million up to $15 million on all of the wells that we drill. In Hawaii, it's on the higher end because of our isolation, because of our geology. So it can be 10 to 15 million.
Do you all have, normally part of the cost is that there are only so many people in the world that can do a specific skill. Given that most of these are done on volcanoes and hotspots, is there enough of a workforce, or do you have to wait in line? Do we have Hawaii-based experts who can run the drill, lead the drill crew?
Academic hole or geothermal hole?
Well, on the testing first.
Yeah, okay. Academic hole, actually, Don has been saying we're not going to be able to do any drilling because the mining industry, so this is the type of drilling that the mining industry uses, I guess, is going berserk, and there's no way we're going to get a crew here to do a one-off. I, thankfully, am on the board of this geothermal well-intentioned group, and at the last geothermal rising meeting, met a driller who is familiar with Hawaii, has asked the question, why isn't Hawaii doing more? Had a great conversation. He's familiar with the university-owned rig. He is liked amongst the community, can bring, so he isn't the driller, he's the drilling supervisor, and then you need 2 drillers, and then drilling assistants to the drillers. Anyway, so I've introduced Don to him on Tuesday at PTA last week. That went very well, so I think I've found crews, but that's not to say it should be taken for granted. And another thing the state might consider if we want to get going on this is that if we had like a drilling program, say 3 wells per year or 6 wells per year, we could buy another rig and have 2 going at the same time to get these answers more quickly. Then the industry would take us more seriously. So I've kind of finagled good relationships to be able to make what seems to be on the table for the next few years happen.
Yeah, for us, for Ormat, we are vertically integrated, and some years back made a decision to have our own drilling department. So we have several rigs. They're busy worldwide, but because we're remote, we have a designated rig here on Hawaii Island. We have the crews, we have the drilling supervisors, but there are still some specialized support that we need for folks with the drill bits, folks with, it's all really technical in nature. And the cementing of, is another key element for construction of wells and certain folks and certain services. So you still have to take that into account, and especially if in the middle of the sea like us, it's a little bit more challenging.
Okay, next question. Thank you, everybody, for sending so many questions. Makes my life easier. Does Maui Island have a promising geothermal location, and is any geothermal research being conducted on Maui?
Yes. Okay. Then Mike can add to this. We've done little work on Maui, and we need to do more. And if I can get contracts in place by the end of next month to the university, we will prioritize doing some work on Maui. I was surprised to learn yesterday that a 3,000 deep well was drilled on Ulapalakua Ranch. Apparently, I don't have this data that I've looked at, but apparently didn't show elevated temperatures. Ulapalakua Ranch happens to sit on the rift zone, the southwest rift zone of East Maui volcano, so that's a good location. Hana area actually has had some recent volcanism, and that rift is of interest because it has a very long submarine extension. So I need to build relationships on Maui or work with others to build relationships on Maui, because I think this should be a place where we focus. And I guess mentioning that 3,000-foot deep well that wasn't warm could be because it wasn't deep enough, right? So as I showed with Lanai, I think we can't rule out the possibility of a resource or temperature, which isn't necessarily equivalent to a resource, but it's one necessary element until we get to 6,000 feet or 2 kilometers. I jumped around there, so if that wasn't clear, ask me again. But Ormat did a bit of work in Maui.
So we did, but it was mostly in the form of policy. We helped with some rules at the county. But, I think you're going to have to do more geophysics like you've done on Hawaii Island to really prove up what the potential is on Maui. But from your maps, to me, it has very good potential. It's just that for the person sending the question, we need to do more work. Fortunately, there's been some funding to do more geothermal assessment at the state level. So this is something that we're looking forward to, and I hope Nicole and the university is going to be involved in that.
I'll just mention one more thing. One of the reasons, so it's easier to do work where the topography is not really severe, and it is on Maui. So that's one of the reasons Lanai was a fairly easy place to work, and center of the Big Island too. It's fairly flat, right? So when we get to really rugged terrain, there's the logistics of doing the work become more challenging. It's not insurmountable. We just need then more money to overcome those challenges, which appears to be, to some degree, coming to fruition. But so it wasn't in deliberate intention to not do work on Maui by any means.
So I have another technology question. If the drilling scaled to Hawaii Islands were a needle scaled to a body, a human body, what size would it be and how deep?
That's a technical question?
Yeah. So in relative, I think they're trying to assess, when I was talking to Nicole in preparation,
Okay.
and I was just like, but how deep and how big? So if you were to scale it to like a test on a human body, your slim hole.
Man, I'm so glad I'm not answering this question.
You mean the width or the depth? The depth? What comes to mind to say, so those 2 wells that were drilled in the Saddle region went down, one was 5,800 feet, one didn't get quite so far, but were drilled at an elevation of from 6,000 feet above sea level, so the goal was to get down to sea level. I don't know how that compares to a human body.
Okay, but what about the size of the
The size of the hole cannot affect anything. I mean, the terrain is vast.
So it's like an earring, maybe?
I can.
Yeah.
So Nicole's rig, if you compare it to a human body, would be a child, and our rig would be an adult.
Okay, we're trying. Thank you to whoever was so creative in helping us with that question.
Good question.
Okay. There's a series of community engagement type questions. I'll put them together. What lessons can we learn from our Indigenous Maori and Native American cousins to help with our community in addressing the geothermal technology? Do you have any insights there, Mike, given your experience?
Yeah, the key in speaking with some of our indigenous, brothers and sisters is really involvement. You got to be part of the discussion. There's no other way. Because if you don't, then you're definitely going to have the most opposition. So there's been some models in New Zealand, the Native Americans on the continent. And so we're stepping up here. We have some folks that are taking the lead to engage our Native Hawaiian communities and just our communities in general. It's important. It's absolutely critical.
And along those lines, and I think we tried to address this earlier, but a little bit more specifically, what lessons can be learned from past community resistance to geothermal, and how can future geothermal development better account for community? So I think you said, inclusion, right, and participation, but are there any key lessons learned, and it doesn't need to only be Ormat, I mean, from before Ormat, right, in terms of what we've learned so far with community?
Yeah, not one important part of this equation is the bottom line is how can we help the community? I mean, what can this technology provide? What will be the results? Yeah, so we talked about if our electric bill goes down, okay, that's a plus, we'll support it. But what about, the environmental side? That's key. People need to understand what really is affected environmentally. You need to get communities involved in the process, be part of it, maybe have apprenticeship programs, like we've heard in previous panels, and that's something that we just got to continue to do moving forward.
Okay, there's one other technology question, and that is, are there any energy production opportunities in Hawaii using low temperature binary cycle generators like those found in Alaska and elsewhere?
So the answer is yes. So our parent company, Ormat, that was how the company started off, using low temperature resource for remote locations, and even some in the temperature differences in the Dead Sea in Israel. It's just that for our parent company, we're looking at utility scale, But if there's anyone that has a lower temperature resource that's interested in us providing the equipment, we definitely have that capability, and we've done that around the world.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, awesome. I think we're gonna thank you for everyone else. We're gonna stop with the questions for now and close out the panel because you get Colton next. Thank you, Colton. I think I just want to give the panel an opportunity. In terms of, we started with what we want the audience to walk away with. I just want to, given the last few, what do we have? 57 minutes that we've been talking story here. What you can close and just share your final thought, please. Could we start with you, Colton?
Sure. This panel by design is very focused on geothermal, and I think we had a very good discussion on the technology and science, as well as the way you get geothermal resources done and how you get projects done, and do it in a way that's respectful of the community in which that project lies. I think we have to also remind ourselves that when we think about geothermal, we have to think of all the different options that are before us. We talked a lot about the potential benefits, a lot of some of the potential issues with geothermal, but we need to remember that any other resource, any other renewable resource that we're contemplating, that we're putting in the ground today, that we're planning for next year or the year after that, each of those different technologies and options have their own set of issues, they have their own set of impacts, they have their own set of trade-offs, and of course their own set of advantages. And we can't think of any one technology in a vacuum to say, yes, I want to do geothermal here in this location, or no, I don't want to do it. Because when you make that choice for geothermal, you're perhaps unconsciously making a decision that we need to do something else somewhere else. And for all of us, being in this conference the last 2 days, I hope we can take away the varied discussions that we've had on different issues and different solutions and different technologies, and understand that they all have to come together at some point, and collectively we need to figure out what are the right set of things we want to agree to be part of our energy future.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, totally 100% in agreement there with Colton. And, geothermal is not the only solution, it's part of the solution. And it does have its attributes, it does have its advantages, and it does have disadvantages, like any other resource. Wind, solar, batteries, hydro, everything needs to be considered in the mix. But what my takeaway and what I'd like folks to take away from here is really we need to get more data. We need to understand the actual potential of the state's resources. That is the key. States on the continent where they have a lot of oil fields, they have wells that they've drilled for years now, just waiting to be placed online because they've done it ahead of time. If we can get somewhere near to at least understanding the potential of our resource, it'll attract more people interested in coming over and consider development. It would, and it would drive costs down because it takes a lot of, the biggest risk is typically the geothermal resource, right? Because the equipment is equipment. You can place it with wherever you have a facility, but you need to identify the resource. And for me, that's the biggest takeaway for everyone. Thank you.
Nicole, you got a few seconds left.
Right. I don't need to say much more, but I think, just that it's been somewhat frustrating. I have been frustrated over the years that geothermal is not more a part of the dialogue, but then also not being able to say what our potential resource in terms of capacity or megawatts is, because we totally lack the data to do so outside of Puna, seems to me a worthy investment. And talking about $100 or $200 million, and people are like, oh, that's way too much money, but we're talking about billion-dollar problems, right? And so I think it's not a huge investment, and I hope I've made the point that it's not going to be, even if we find out, for example, Oahu doesn't have a resource, we're going to gain valuable information about Oahu's groundwater resource. And my current carbon storage project is going back to the HSDP well that was drilled in the 1990s to understand the growth and evolution of Hawaiian volcanoes because the well's sitting there. So it won't be a waste of time, as Mike said, to drill these wells. And I have one more really small comment, which is we've been talking about geothermal electricity production, and that's geothermal encompasses also like building cooling using groundwater. And so the geothermal industry is a bigger thing, but this is a very important context in which to be discussing geothermal for our state.
So I started with hoping you would walk away with wanting to know more and discuss more. I hope we have fulfilled that. Thank you, everyone.